Hello, everyone. Welcome to another thought provoking episode of X Raised, where knowledge meets inspiration in the intricate dance of industry evolution. This is the show that lets business meets brilliance and innovation and leaders, like our guest today, get the spotlight. And in this episode, I'm bringing you into the intricate world of legal tech with a guest whose credentials are as impressive as they're inspiring. She's not only an award winning barrister, but also an intuitive entrepreneur, seamlessly blending the realms of law and artificial intelligence as she embodies excellence in every endeavor. With over 2 decades of legal experience, she's tackled complex disputes across various sectors, from construction to insurance. And as a co founder and CEO of MiAI Law, she's pioneering AI driven solutions to revolutionize legal research, making it more efficient, affordable, and compliant with stringent privacy laws. You better stay tuned as I welcome to our show the remarkable, the returning Laina Chan. Hi, Laina.
Hi, Miles. How are you?
Great, great. How are you?
I'm just struck by what you said about it being affordable. It's affordable relative to the cost of hiring a human being to do the work, but it's actually really, really expensive. And I understand why all those companies, OpenAI, etc., are all running at a huge loss because the cost of actually generating these answers using AI is
Yeah.
extremely high, but it's low relative to the cost of human labor
Okay. Well,
of doing the same work.
mhm. Okay, I see. And I must say, our topic today is both timely and critical. As technology continues to evolve, Lena, ensuring that client data remains protected is paramount. I'm sure everyone tuning in will learn a lot about how AI can uphold a sacred trust between lawyers and their clients. So, how does my AI law ensure that client data remains confidential and protected in an era dominated by digital transformation?
Okay, that's really interesting that you bring this up because yesterday I was talking to my team about this, and we we're obviously not worried about the cases that are in the public domain. There's no copyright cases. We get the cases that have been handed down by the courts. We upload it into our own servers, but then things have to be done to it. I mean, we have to vectorize it. So every bit of text gets converted to an equation.
Mm-hmm.
And that has to be done. We're currently using the NVIDIA inference model so that we actually send that case, for example, over to NVIDIA. NVIDIA processes the case, puts in the metadata that we want
Okay.
into the case, and returns a string of equations, vectors. It's called vectorization.
Vector.
And so we keep your original case
Mm-hmm.
on our own server, but in order to process it, it has to go to NVIDIA. And so and of course, NVIDIA says that they do not use our data for training. And I'm hoping that we can trust $1 trillion company or whatever it is they're worth
Well, and
when
we
they say that, yes, where they say that they're not using our data. I'm sure
uh-huh.
that is the case because, I mean, there'd be so much data going around. They just wouldn't have the time to be using. Anyway, but the fact is they say they don't use our data for training or anything.
Mm-hmm.
But there are risks, right?
Of
So
course.
one of the things that I was talking to my team about is that we want to anonymize all the data. So we anonymize the data before we send it for vectorization. And then everything on our servers, all the data is encrypted. And then I'm also talking to them about making sure that the data, when it's sent to NVIDIA for processing, is encrypted as well, so
Mm-hmm.
that it's encrypted in the transmission. But that would mean that NVIDIA would have to have our encryption keys. Hopefully I'm sure we can work that out. So what we've come up with is make sure all our own data is protected within our servers.
Mm-hmm.
And we have ways where, there's several ways of talk to you about where we call it military grade security, but we have a key, the client has a key, an encryption key, and that you can only read the the text, the
Uh-huh.
data in the servers if both keys
Are there.
are there. So like, when you go to a bank and the bank has their master key,
Yes.
you have to put your key in and you turn it at the same
Yes.
time, you know?
Like a, like two-way authentication,
No, two-way
something like that.
authentication is different. Two-way authentication is when you log on, right? So that when you
Mhm.
log on onto your account, we're saying we need to verify that's you. Yes, we do that as well.
Uh-huh.
But on top of that, you want to make sure that the data itself is encrypted. And
Mhm.
and I've been talking to my team about having two two-sided end-to-end encryption so that we have a key and they have a key, and that you can only read their data if both keys are keyed in.
Yes.
And then there's also discussion about whether we make the client's key dynamic so it changes all the time. But then that could, I just don't know how painful it is for the client to have to deal with constantly evolving encryption keys.
Uh-huh.
So that's one thing, that's protecting the data while it's on our server.
Mm-hmm.
Also, we have to worry about when we're sending it for processing. So we
Yes.
send the text and it comes back as vectors.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have to protect the transmission as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also have to trust that NVIDIA will
Yeah.
will not deal with the data.
Yeah, and I really hope they're not gonna be used for training as promised by NVIDIA.
Yeah, that's right. And so what we're doing our due diligence to make sure that NVIDIA is, checking to see exactly on what terms that they're saying that they handle this data. I really hope that we can trust them. I'm sure we can. I mean,
Is
they
there a
would
way
be
to
going out of
protect?
business. We'd be going out of business when they're using our data to train when we're just asking them to vectorize it. And then I think the second thing is that we have to be careful who we are using, which providers we're using to vectorize our data, or which
Mhm.
models we're using, because NVIDIA has all these APIs on their server
Uh-huh.
that we can call into action when we want our model to do certain work.
Mhm.
We call in these NVIDIA APIs and all the work is done. And so it's all being done on the NVIDIA service. It comes back and then we are going through reasoning and ranking, etc. And we generate our research report.
Mhm.
But I think we can trust NVIDIA, but you don't necessarily want to go and try untested providers of these APIs. So I
Mhm.
think you have to be very careful in your vendor choice. And
Yeah.
then you also have to be careful of what encryption measures you've got in place to protect the data while it's on your server. And then I think you have to be thinking about what is happening during the transmission. You don't want to be hacked while the data is being transmitted to NVIDIA for processing, and
Mhm.
it comes back as a vector. And then you have to be careful who you are allowing to
Right.
process the data.
Well, it seems like you're very careful in choosing because you have NVIDIA, and that resonates deeply in this digital age. Because aside from compliance, ensuring data protection is about maintaining the very essence of trust in the lawyer-client relationship.
So one thing we're doing is just so that we're making sure that we anonymize it before we send.
Uh-huh. Okay. Well, building on that, let's discuss the broader landscape, Lena. In your view, what standards should AI-driven legal platforms be held to when it comes to privacy and data protection?
Well, if we're dealing with the Australia, then we have the Privacy Act and we have to comply with that. And from the
Uh-huh.
10th of June, the statutory tort of privacy will be alive and well. And it's derived from the English tort of privacy,
Mhm.
where we've had movie stars, etc., suing journalists and reporters for breaching their privacy, for publishing photos of them or
Mhm.
them in compromising situations, and they say that that's a breach of their privacy. But for us, what we're worried about is to make sure that we're not subject to any data breaches. And there's a defense. There are a couple of defenses. There are a couple of elements that the user would have to establish in order for them to establish that we've breached our tort of privacy. And one of them is that they would have to show that we've been reckless in the way that we protected their data. And so recklessness, I think, would be demonstrated if we had taken no steps to encrypt their data, and that we didn't have all these measures in place to make sure that even if someone hacks into our system, that they cannot actually get at the data. And what they get at is encrypted data, and then without the key, it's useless.
Yes. Well, I'd like to highlight what you first said, Laina. Straight to the point, compliance is indeed non-negotiable in this case. But as we know, the law isn't a monolith. It varies across borders. And speaking of which, let's touch on the challenges of operating in multiple jurisdictions, because soon you'll be in Europe, you'll be in the United States, or across Middle East. So how does MiAI Law navigate the complexities of differing privacy laws, such as, for example, GDPR in Europe versus Australia's regulations?
You just have to comply with the highest common denominator.
Yeah, okay.
Pretty sure they have common standards.
Okay.
We just have to make sure we protect the client's data, that we're not using their client's data, we're not selling their data, their personal data. We have to be really careful. And that we're protecting that, we're making sure all that data is encrypted, that even if someone hacks in, that they cannot access the client's data, that we're not subject of data breaches, and even if we have measures in place to make sure that that data is protected. And then we just have to make sure that we don't use the client's data, that we're not using their data for training, and we're making sure that every user's data is ring-fenced to them so that there's no bleeding across user A's data to user B's data, that everything is ring-fenced. We're not selling it. We're not using it for training. We're encrypting it. We're just making sure that we have put a very protective moat around our data.
Right. So standard practice here would be not using or selling the data for training. So that's proactive and meticulous, I must say. It's just clear that MiAI Law adapts and anticipates. And I heard you'll be launching in London, right? Soon.
Yes, in 2 months. So, there is a way of being even more protective, but it's really expensive. And so if you don't want to, if you're a massive firm and you have millions and millions of dollars and you want to invest in this, that's fine, so that we can actually have the models on your own dedicated AI servers, and so that you never have to send your data out to NVIDIA or to any third party for processing. We can run it all on your own servers, but it just costs a lot of money. And so I think if you're a large firm and you're earning hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, it doesn't really matter to you if we have server costs. $3 million, for example, server costs.
That's keeping data. It's really cost.
Well, no, it's the cost of having the AI servers to run all the inference that you need to run to get the AI output. So the data is kept on one server, and then it's sent to your own server, AI server, for processing, etc. It never goes anywhere else. It never goes to NVIDIA. It never goes anywhere, but you're running it on your own server. So that's very expensive, but the solution is there. It's just very expensive. So I don't know, obviously, a barrister like me, a sole practitioner, cannot afford to have my own cluster of H100 servers running my own model. It's not economical. And for people like me, we just have to rely on the fact that I've taken the measures that I have taken to protect your data, to keep it ring-fenced and not used for training, etc., and that your personal data is all protected and encrypted. But for big firms earning hundreds of millions of dollars, a year in revenue, we can provide you with solutions that mean that your data doesn't get sent anywhere at all.
Mm-hmm. Well,
But when it gets sent for processing, it's just going to your own set of
yeah,
H100
it's
server.
isolated.
So
Mm-hmm.
it's money, right?
Yes,
I
of
know because
course.
I do a lot of construction law, and so the engineers would always say, well, there's always a solution. It's just how
Yes.
much do you want to pay for that solution?
Everything has a cost. This
Everything has a
and this
cost. That's right.
and these solutions are just testaments to your commitment to upholding privacy standards globally. And how about the technical safeguards, Lena? Encryption plays a pivotal role in data security. And since I'm very familiar with your military-grade cybersecurity measures, could you tell our audience how does it factor into ensuring the integrity of legal research within MyAI Law's platform?
You don't need the encryption for the integrity of your research. You just need the encryption to give our clients the peace of mind that their data is protected.
Okay.
Because before we actually use your data for research, we need to decrypt it. We can't
Yeah.
we can't process encrypted data. It's the data has to be in its natural form for us to process it. But then when it comes back, it's in a vector. But the original text is what is encrypted, because we will keep that as well.
So they're sensitive.
I mean, unless you don't want us to keep it, we can just keep the vectorized. We can just keep the vectorized data. We don't personally need your data. What we want are the vectors, because that's what the AI works on. It works on the vectors so that we know where all the data comes from, etc. We personally don't need your data. I would say it would save us a lot of cost if we didn't have to store all of the data.
So their sensitive information data is secure with your two-sided one-to-one dynamic encryption, right?
Well, it's definitely encrypted. Whether or
Uh-huh.
not they want the dynamic encryption, which could be very painful for them because the encryption key keeps changing for them.
Yeah.
Dynamic. I think you'd have to have one of those.
Yeah, but that could be an option as well, right? As you
Yeah,
said,
that's right.
to bigger companies. And it's just reassuring that they have this option. Also, to know that my AI law treats client data with the utmost seriousness, employing top-tier security measures. And beyond technology, let's consider the human element here. What protocols or trainings should law firms implement when integrating AI tools to ensure both efficiency and ethical compliance? Because I remember we touched on prompting it, right? Previously.
On how to use AI.
Yeah,
I think you have to trust
what
your
do you think
tool.
are the essential trainings that they should take?
I think, well, first of all, they need to learn which AI tools they can trust and which ones they cannot. So one barrister told me a few weeks ago that ChatGPT now has ChatGPT for law, and I know it doesn't. And I said, no, it doesn't. And he goes, yes, it does. Yes, it does. It's really, really cheap, $30 or whatever. And you can, upload your own documents. They say they don't use it for training, and then off you go, you can do all the stuff. And I said, no, OpenAI does not have that. And then he went off, and the next day he goes, oh, you're right. It was some other provider. And he had just gotten confused. And so I think you have to be really careful when you are using an AI tool that you subscribe to on the internet as to exactly who the provider is and to know exactly what measures they have taken to protect your data. So I think it has to be a trusted vendor. And I think that's why, even in the beginning, when Dropbox first came out, in law firms wouldn't allow their employees to use Dropbox. They had their own cloud data provider, etc. So same with here. I think when you're using it for law, you have to know your vendor and know that you can trust that the vendor has taken adequate measures to protect your data, not using your data for training.
So it's really essential that law firms make sure that the legal tools they're using not just increasing confidence, but there are policies and guidelines have to be in place that could govern how the technology can actually be used. And while AI offers remarkable capabilities, it's essential to remember that it's a tool. That's why we
Well,
have
it's a tool, and I think people are just too trusting of AI at the moment. AI at the moment hallucinates a lot. It makes things up all the time
right.
because, as I said in the last episode to you, it's just predicting what the
Mhm.
likely next set of words might be. It doesn't really understand.
Uh-huh.
And so it's only predicting and it's only a probability that it's gotten it right. And it's not 100% probability that it's gotten the answer correct as to what the next set of words might be. So it's
Mhm.
constantly predicting. It doesn't really understand what it's doing. And I find that humans are so trusting of it. And that's why you have all these cases where, lawyers have gotten into trouble because they've put a question into ChatGPT, they've gotten an answer, they haven't bothered to check whether the cases even exist. They haven't bothered to check whether first of all, whether the cases exist or when
Mhm.
the cases do exist, whether those cases are actually relevant to the problem that you're trying to solve. They don't check this.
Makes sense.
And
Mhm.
a friend of mine had a personal problem and he just put a question into OpenAI, got the answer, which is wrong actually, and then just relied upon it, not in a court case, but in a
Uh-huh.
personal matter. He just relied upon it without checking. And I think the general public are just too trusting. They just think it's like a Google search. But
Mhm.
what I'm saying is that the answer that you get back is not necessarily correct.
Uh-huh.
There are elements in the answer which would be correct, but then there's other elements that are probably irrelevant, and then there's other elements that are just plain wrong.
Uh-huh. I see. Well, makes sense. That's
So
why implementing robust protocols ensures that technology enhances rather than compromises legal practice. I mean, it's really critical, right?
yeah, so you have to make sure that you're picking the right tool.
Uh-huh.
And then secondly, at the stage, you have to check everything. We do not have super intelligence. We do not have a situation where you can trust the AI to be correct all the time. You
Mhm.
don't. Even we're not even trying to promise anything more than 95% accuracy at this stage
Mhm.
because there's not, we're just not at that stage. And while all our answers will be hyperlinked and hot linked to the pinpoint reference in the
Uh-huh.
actual case that we're relying upon, but so that you can check, you still have to check it because I am not promising that we're 100% accurate. I can't
Right.
promise that. Technology is not at the spot where I can make such a promise.
Mhm.
And also, the courts have taken this into their own hands by handing down practice notes for the practitioners to comply with that say that we have to tell the court if we're preparing submissions, for example, that we've used AI to help us in the preparation of the submissions and that we've checked everything.
Yeah, it really requires human oversight and ethical consideration. So, yeah, thank you for explaining, Lena, and thank you once
Can't
again.
be lazy. You can't be lazy. I mean, yes, asking my AI to do a research report for you, we might generate a report for you in 10 minutes, and that might have taken a human being 2 days to
Yeah.
do that in research.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not saying that at the end of the 10 minutes, that's it, that your job is done. You still need to spend a few hours going through and
Yeah.
checking the links
Mm. Well,
to
thank
make sure that it gives you that we're right.
yeah, the right solutions.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Lena, once again for sharing your expertise on the critical balance between embracing technological advancements and upholding the foundational principles of legal practice. And this conversation will make everyone realize that AI should be integrated thoughtfully, ensuring that confidentiality and integrity remain paramount. So thank you, Lena.
Thanks, Miles.
For our audience who are
Until
here,
next time, although I'm going to Singapore next week.
yeah, I'm sure. I wonder if we could see you next week, but let's see.
Well, next week I'm speaking in Borneo, actually, at the Borneo ADR week. I'm talking about a world without lawyers is automated
Yeah.
decision-making future.
Ah, your paper. Exciting. Good luck. I'm sure they're gonna have fun listening
Well,
to you.
they launched MiAI Law, the company, a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
When
Okay.
I told them I didn't have a product, but they still wanted to launch the company. But anyway, inching towards our point
I'm
now.
happy to hear more after that, Laina. So, for our audience who are curious to learn more, go to MyAI Law's website at miai.law or send them an email at interest@myai.law. Thank you, everyone, for joining me and Laina. And don't forget to share this series within your network. This has been your host, Miles. Stay focused and inspired with X-Rays.